Okay, so how cool is this? I get to interview 3 interviewers. Now, that's going to be pretty interesting to see how this goes. Usually they're interviewing me. So this is going to be great. I can turn the tables today. I won't embarrass them as they sometimes do me. But anyway, I really appreciate them being here. I have Loreena Dickson, who's always enthusiastic and energetic and a good friend. Ken Eastwood is here as well with his plaid shirt. And then you have Ryan Spence here as well. Ryan, I was just thinking that you go back a long way. You folks are from CJBK, News Talk Radio. You host the morning show, but it's almost as far back as I can remember the food bank. I always remember coming into CJBK, and Ryan, you were mostly the producer then, right? But you were the ones that always put us at ease when we didn't know what we were doing, and I remember you did that for years with Steve Garrison. So, but you host sometimes as well, correct?
Yeah, I do. I've done a few things over the years, Glenn, and you guys didn't take too long to be put at ease. Let me tell you that whenever you and Jane were guests in the studio, we were always honored to have you there, and certainly the great work that you were doing at the food bank. And anybody who was named the most honest politician in Ottawa, we would bend over backwards for, that's for sure, because what an honor that is, my friend.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I'm not there anymore, so that's great. Fortunately, yeah. And Ken and Loreena, how long have you folks been on the show?
Well, this show, it's been, I think we've been together for 5 or 6 years, Loreena.
Yeah, not even that long, actually. Yeah. I think it'll be 4 this year. It just feels longer to you, Ken.
It feels like eons, Glenn. But, I was thinking back, over the different iterations of my radio career, and even going back to Rogers TV, I can't count the number of times that I have spoken to you and Jane, or either individually or together. And yeah, many, many times on Rogers TV on the old daytime show.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why I want to talk to the 3 of you, because I think you've talked to so many different people in London. You're well known. It's great. But I do think because this show is more about poverty and about hunger and those kind of things, you folks have been there from the very beginning, right? Always when there was a food drive, you would do an interview with us or whatever it is that we would appreciate it. But sometimes there were controversial things that happened around poverty, and you would talk to us about that or whatever. But it's really interesting, I think, for me. I've always someone who believes that the food bank is really, in many ways, a media creation. And we designed it that way. We designed it so that we didn't want to go through some kind of filter or other things. We wanted to be able to speak directly to the London public and to Londoners in general, businesses, associations, and others. And the media always has given us that opportunity, which we really appreciate. Sometimes it brings up some controversial items or whatever, but I really do believe that our need as a food bank for the public to be involved with what we're doing is essential, not just because it's how you get food or you get financial donations, but also because it's the public that speaks up when there's something they want to get handled right. And I think that you folks are a huge, huge part of that. Take homelessness as an example, right? You think of, I'm sure you've talked to tons of people about homelessness. I know other media groups do as well. But really, if it wasn't for the media focusing on that the way that it has for the last 2 years, I'm not sure we would be where we're at now, having these broad discussions. Do you folks feel that? Do you feel that when you're doing those kind of things, that it could have that kind of impact, or no, you just kind of wonder what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think we hope that it has that kind of impact. We know that getting those important stories out there, the ones that really pull on people's heartstrings, are so important, because people will walk downtown, they'll see some of the homeless people, maybe people who are suffering from addictions, and they'll walk on by. But to actually hear the stories, how many, many different agencies are going down there. They call these folks their friends. They do everything they can to help them. They know how many of them are out there on any given day, night in London. We can tap into that resource and therefore let the city know how terrible the situation is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Glen, we really feel it's like a responsibility. You know, our responsibility is to be a reflection of our community, to tell those stories about the reality that exists in our community. And we know, thanks to you and Jane and the stories that you tell us, how dire that situation is when it comes to poverty and hunger and homelessness. And, you know, we're the vehicle, you're the voice. And I think we feel that responsibility every day. And it's, you know, when we're choosing things to talk about on the radio, you know, it's, you know, we kind of run it through this filter. Is it entertaining? Is it important to the listener? But when it comes to things like homelessness and poverty and hunger, it's a no-brainer because it's just an important thing. It's something that the listener needs to know about. They need to be aware of what's happening in our community. And, you know, it's not about, like you said, raising funds or, you know, getting donations up to a specific point, though that's something that we tend to talk about. Yeah. It's that responsibility about informing the community.
I would say too, Glen, from a non-radio personality point of view, and as just a lifelong Londoner, I can truly, honestly say, and as somebody from the time I was very young till current day, I like to just travel around London, get in the car and just see what's going on. Going back 30 to 40 years ago, before I was in radio, I can honestly say that you could pinpoint and pick out the people that, oh yeah, I've been seeing that person on the street for a long time. And in some cases, I truly did know their names. We know the evolution of homelessness over the last couple of years, and nobody better than you and Jane and your great organization at the food bank. It has gotten to a level of proportion where we all have to just take a really close look at the community that we're living in, and we all have to give thanks for the position that we're in if we're fortunate enough not to be a recipient of the services that you provide at the food bank. But we all know, whether we're in radio or not, that something needs to be done. And I don't think anyone truly has the answer, but we try on a daily basis. If there's something that we can do to help the needs of our community and the citizens of this city, we try to be there, whether it's for you or other organizations that are there to service that community.
So when you say that you're the vehicle and we are the voices, I don't think we see it that way. At least Jane and I don't. I think of you folks have also helped to become advocates in these kind of things. Not that you're personally taking that on, because I know with the radio station you have to be careful what you do with that. But I do think you show such sympathy and empathy to the people that you have on. It's not just towards Jane and I, it's to all of the other people that are really having a struggling time. So I really do see the media in their own way as kind of these soft advocates. If you weren't interested, you wouldn't be covering us. I think that's just the way it is, because we don't tend to be newsy, right? I think there are food drives and people cover that, but I think there's real values behind all of that. So I think of places like the London Free Press, for instance. Twice they came to South Sudan with us, right, and told these remarkable stories. I think of Peter Garland, who used to be at CFPL Radio. I mean, he came to Guatemala with us when we were building schools. And when I think of all the evolution we've gone through in this last few years, especially with COVID, CJBK, the morning show, you folks have really become the people that we've been able to count on, not just to allow us to tell a story. I don't phone you, or Jane doesn't phone you and ask you folks if you'll cover us. I mean, you folks willingly do that of your own accord. But the empathy that you show for the subject matter, I think, is really significant, right? Let's say it was just kind of and you're distant and you're contextual or all of those kind of things, like you stay back, you're objective. Or you can get into it and try to understand what's going on in our community. I think you folks do that. You excel at doing that. I wonder if you feel that yourself, and I wonder if you would rather just be more comfortable at being the vehicle, or do you mind sometimes adding some emotional heft to these discussions that we're having?
Well, and I think that's part of being that vehicle and being that responsible vehicle, Glen. I mean, you can't accurately tell a story unless you can have some empathy, unless you can get a feel for what it's like to be going through a situation like this. Now, granted, we are in the enviable position of some to be well fed and well housed and well taken care of. So we rely on organizations like the food bank and others in the community to allow us to feel that empathy, to teach us what others in our community are going through. So to be able to tell that story accurately, to have that empathy.
Yeah.
And I would say too, Glenn, I have to say that the people who are not coming to us, as you say, but we are going to them, if it were not people that we trusted so tightly and held close to our chest, because somebody like you and Jane, and not to keep singling you out, but you look at the Business Cares food drive year after year, and way back in the beginnings, as you say, I remember that first year clearly, and Ed Holder was a big part, along with Wayne Dunn and the great team that they surrounded themselves with up until current day. Once again, we have to trust the other end as well, and we know that you guys are doing the jobs that you're doing for the greater good of the community, so we're always going to be there, and yeah, you may not have to call us because we want to be there to help you.
Yeah.
I've actually used a food bank years and years ago, Glenn, when I was a single mom working in Sarnia in radio, making crap money. We still do, but my little girl and I, I decided I need to feed this sweet little thing better than I have been. I just couldn't cut it on my own. And I frequented the food bank, I think probably 4 or 5 times one year. And I felt honestly terrible about doing it because I was thinking other people need this more than I do. Yeah. But I swallowed my pride and I went in. They took good care of us. It was only a short period of time that I had to use the food bank, but they were there for me, and I try to pay it back, pay it forward. Now, plus I grew up, in a low income family. My dad was with the Lions Club. He always said, charity begins at home. We have to give even though we don't have a lot. Yeah. He would take me around to Tim Hortons stores back then, and he would pick up big bags of donuts that they were going to throw out. Not the most nourishing food, but he would then take them to the food bank or to the soup kitchen. We lived in Oldies Village, and he would drop off the donuts. Yeah. It was a crazy thing he did, but he just wanted to help in whatever way he could.
It's so interesting. I love these stories, but I think way back the very first food drive we had, I was a firefighter. I had no idea what I was doing. I was asked if we would, start up a food bank, and so we were trying to do that. But so we had a food drive, and so they put bags in the newspaper, and then it went out to Londoners, and nobody had any idea what to expect. We most of all. But what ended up happening was that during that time, some of the media worked on these stories called The Other London, and it was about. So this is back in 1986. So it was about what poverty was like in London, and people were shocked. They had no idea that such a percentage of London were living in low income or poverty situations. Even homelessness was around back then. But the media themselves were shocked, right? Usually it's people on social assistance back then, right? And you just figure, well, they're getting help from the government or whatever it was. They did not realize that such a huge percentage of Londoners was in this predicament. And it's also true there was a recession going on right then, so it became very pronounced. And suddenly, almost overnight, that became a big issue. That food drive, which we were told to expect 40,000 pounds of food, got 245,000 pounds of food just in a week, right? And that's from the media telling the story. But I guess what I'm saying is, can you imagine if that had happened and the media had not been involved?
Yeah, it would have been a completely different story. And, it's funny, too, you mentioned that the people were surprised, Londoners were surprised at the level of poverty, and even the media is. And I think when you look back over the last 2 years and what the pandemic has done, and the shortcomings that the pandemic have laid bare, I think is also surprising to a lot of people. I think we're sort of coming full circle in that respect, in that a lot of people have realized the situation is far worse than we realized a couple of years ago. And I think we can attribute a lot of that to the effects of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think as well, too, just to kind of to piggyback on what Loreena was saying as well, Glen, about what her father did, and that demonstrated to her about the importance of giving back, and it sort of jogged my memory also. I love hearing stories. My dad, he sort of taught that to us as well, my brother and I, he cannot go past somebody that he sees in need without digging into his pocket or try to provide something to them. And he'll tell stories. He has his routine every morning. He gets up and listens to Ken and Loreena, and then he goes out for his little travels, and he'll go to grab a newspaper and read the sports, and he'll go to a Tim Hortons. And one of those Tim Hortons oftentimes is the one near the Western Fairground, and he'll tuck his truck into the corner there. And so he meets a lot of people that are just sort of in the parking lot. And the best stories he tells is the ones where he'll help provide a little bit of money for people, and whether that's the right way to do it or not, but he gives in other ways. But the great thing is to hear these stories that he tells about people he has met there over the years that come back a year later and say to him, Jim or Mr. Spence, here's what I'm doing now. And they have a more secure lifestyle than they had before because they are helping themselves get better in life and try to advance. And a lot of people have the perception that they see people on the streets and that's what they're destined to do for the rest of their lives. But we forget about the truly great stories of people coming back and being able to survive on their own. And it starts with giving back to our community.
Yeah. What's happening to our community? I mean, seriously, what's happening to our country? It's so difficult, I think, for us to kind of get our heads around it. And for one of these interviews, I interviewed Mike Savage, who was an MP with me all those years ago, but he's now the mayor of Halifax. He's in his third term. Now, he's chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus, and they've just finished meeting not too long ago. But the number one issue for every big city mayor that was there was homelessness. And they're all just trying to get their head around, like, where did this come from in these numbers and to this degree? And I do think that it's, we're all facing the same thing as Londoners. We're all realizing it. Canadians are realizing it in their community. But how do you motivate, I think, your community and Londoners to not only, provide food or lodging or clothing, whatever it is? How do we motivate the decision makers and the policy makers enough so that they will then turn around and do something about that? And I bring that up because I was just at the City Hall this week, and I was just trying to remind people, if it wasn't for the media, you wouldn't be having these big summits that you're having right now. There's 3 of them that they're having, right? The next one, I think, the last one is next week, how you're going to handle homelessness and the mental health problem, right? All the different partners are there. But would they even be having those meetings if it hadn't have been for the media telling these stories, right? The narrators of what's going on in our community? I don't think it would have happened. I think it was you folks that kind of shone the light on all of that. And yes, the way you did that is interview people that were homeless or, agencies or whatever it is. But it brought it to the public attention so much. And as Ken has alluded to, and I think it's true, the pandemic made people more attuned to that. But I do think that that's what has brought the big decision makers to the table. I wonder, do you guys realize you have that kind of clout, or do you not?
I don't think so.
No.
Thank you for saying it, though.
Yeah. Well, and I respect that, but I don't think, you can't lay that entirely at the feet of the media. I mean, people form their own opinions. People see what they see too. Yes, we can maybe help forward those stories a little bit, but I think people understand. I don't know. I really feel like we are at a place in history where a lot of separate storylines are starting to converge, and not in a good way. We see a homeless crisis. We're seeing a mental health crisis. We're seeing a substance abuse crisis. We're seeing all of these things that are kind of coming to a confluence and resulting in some really big problems. And when it comes to really big problems, it's going to take really big solutions. And to get those really big solutions, you need large numbers of people. You talked about those summits, Glen, and that's how we're going to find solutions to these problems. And I also feel like one of the other things that we're seeing is a real lack, I don't want to say a lack of empathy, but certainly less empathy than we have seen in the past. And it feels like that there's sort of an empathetic cycle, and we're at kind of an ebb right now. And I'm just hoping that starts to come back, and maybe that will be the catalyst to make things better. I don't know.
Anybody else?
The flip side to that coin, I would say, is that there is a lack of empathy among a lot of people, but then there's also a lot of sympathy. When you look at the recent anonymous donation at the mayor's breakfast recently, $25 million, the only further point to that is, where does that money go, and I don't know if Glen, you could answer better than us, but how you overall fix the problem. But I mean, $25 million is no drop in the bucket, and hopefully that converts up to the $35 million in the ultimate long run. But where do you start? In London, we're not in a bubble with the homeless issues either. You look at any community, small or large, across the country, and the problem has just exasperated itself over particularly the last 3 years to a noticeable level anyhow. But I think that's the big question, whether people have sympathy or empathy. One of the questions that they have is, where do we go from here?
Also, I think, Glen, the success of food drives. I know you always say, and so does Jane, that there aren't goals. You appreciate everything that comes in when we have our food drives. And you always are so good about thanking Londoners for taking the time out to do that. And we always seem to bring in as much as we need at any given time. So there is also that underlying, giving in this community and many others, but London just shines always with these food drives.
Yes, and I think that imagine having those food drives, imagine having business cares without the media. Again, I bring that up because I still think it's important. And when Ken, when you said that, the summit is really the big place where the answers are going to come from, I really agree with that. But I still maintain that summit would not be out there and in public if it hadn't have been for the media bringing this issue and the issues of mental health and other things into the public consciousness. So it's one thing to tell a story, and it's another thing to tell a kind of narrative that talks about need in a community. And it's another thing, again, I think, to bring about a kind of compelling within people that they want to do something about it, however that's done. And something like homelessness is so hard to figure out, like, where would you even start, correct? But when I think of the food drive we had at Christmas, I was on your show that morning, but we had a press conference that day, and I encouraged people not to give. Do you remember that? And I mean, that didn't go over so well with some people because they knew that the need was great. But it's the first time I'd ever done that. But the reality was the donor was so exhausted, right? They were facing food prices as well and high rents and all of those things. We just felt it wasn't right after 36 years of being a food bank. It kept going back to that same well and trying to prime the pump and twist arms and all of those kind of things. So we said, don't give. It's okay, we understand, we'll get you when things are better. And the next thing you knew, we got 50% more food over Christmas than we had the year before, right? And I think...
They didn't listen to you, Glen.
Yeah, nobody listens
That's a smart thing anyway. But I do think... It's a story. You're taking their own experiences into account. But how do you get that out there to those people that you understand? If it's not for the media doing it, I mean, I could blog, right? Jane could go ahead and sing a song or whatever that people are doing about it. It's really the media that gives that opportunity to help the public understand that they want in and we want them in. This isn't just a government answer. So whatever the summit does, Ken, and you're right, whatever the summit does will be helpful, I'm sure, and will bring in large players with large resources and people that can legislate and all of those kind of things. But really, if you don't have the populace with you, if you don't have the citizens with you, then you get back to that situation that we had 36 years ago at the food drive with that first food drive, is that the public doesn't know. And therefore the support won't be there for it. And it seems to me that you folks have done that. You just didn't bring the issue, I don't just mean you folks, I mean all of the media. You brought this issue to the fore. You've told, it doesn't do enough anymore to just read news stories and read facts. People need stories, right? You folks excel at interviewing people on that stuff. But when they hear those stories, they want in and they want their leaders to do something about it. It seems to me we could never do that as a food bank without the media. And I think you need us and all the other agencies as well, because we're on the ground, we get all of that. But without that, I just don't think the media gets the credit that it should. And I'm not trying to
take that credit any day of the week.
Go ahead.
But Glen, and when we address the issue, I think sometimes we fear that we're telling the same stories over and over, and that the listener and the community will start to suffer from fatigue. So is there a part of the narrative that you think is not being told? Is there a part of the story that you think that our listeners don't hear enough about?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I just put out a video this week. See, I'm falling into this. You're asking me the question. This is all wrong.
Gotcha.
Anyway, for instance, people on social assistance, I put the video out on this week. They haven't had an increase in 10 years. 10 years. So that's for people on ODSP or people who are in Ontario Works. That's 900,000 people, almost 1 million people in Ontario. In BC, they haven't had an increase since 2007. That's 15 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the difficulties we're having putting food on the table, paying rent, all that, and this is just people that are working, other things, right? It's really difficult. What do you do if you're somebody on social assistance and your support payments have been frozen for a decade? I think that there is no answer to poverty or homelessness or food banks or whatever it is if we continue to take 1 million people that are in Ontario and keep them frozen out of any kind of solution. And I think that that's a story that doesn't get told. And the reason why it doesn't is because it's political. Yeah. Right? So you folks have to be careful about that. So I do think that the solutions, we all think if we can just get smart people together and we come up with creative solutions like a food bank, that will do it. And it doesn't. And the problems are getting worse, right? Government really has a role to play, policymakers. So I really feel, Ken, that that story is not being told. And now what has happened is those people are now falling out the bottom because they can no longer afford their rent. They are now homeless. These are people on ODSP.
Yeah.
These are people that can't afford their rent anymore, or Ontario Works. All these workers that are coming to the food bank now, our numbers are swelling. Like, we help 22,000 people a month at the food bank. Half of that is directed to food bank, and the other half through all the agencies we assist. But my point is, where are they all coming from? And it's from that area. And if we're not going to talk about it and not going to deal with it, and just try to have food drives to try to keep up with the demand, then I think we're all in trouble. So yes, I do think that there are things that need to be discussed, but I also realize the difficulties often for media to discuss them. Yeah. Very true. I know it's hard.
I think one of the narratives too from back in the early days, Glen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things you used to say was, we hope we're not here next year. We hope we're not here the year after. We want to be here this year because there is a need, but let's get beyond that, and we won't need a service like the London Food Bank. And you talk about the sector of the population that is having trouble right now, and there's a lot of them, but then you look at the middle class that are so many of them teetering on the edge of, when you look at inflation and interest rates right now. And I mean, in my own circle of friends, they talk about how much more they're having to pay every month, when prior to this 6 months ago, things were tough then. How they're going to get through this period of time, it's anyone's guess. And I think we're bringing more people into the fold here as not only the days and weeks go by, but almost on a minute-by-minute basis. People are looking at their financials and saying, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And the province is so adamant to be building so much more housing, but there are people that can't afford any of that housing, right? They're on teetering on the edge. They're maybe moving back in with their parents, a whole bunch of people living together in an apartment, however they can get by right now.
That's right. Well, listen, our time is up, believe it or not. You guys would know about time demands better than I do on this stuff. But I did want to say this is an important part of the poverty narrative, is the role that the media plays. It's also important to understand it's the role that media personalities play. Because radio personalities, I think, bring out the personalities of the people that involve, whether it's food bank directors or somebody that's homeless or whatever. And I have a good illustration of that. Wayne Dunn, who we all know, who directs Business Cares, we all know that a couple of years ago, he lost his daughter, 34 years old, to brain cancer. But I remember it was on your show that he talked to people about that. And that was an emotional thing, right? It's not been easy for him or Diane, his wife, but it was, he felt free to talk about that on your show. And he's usually kind of private about those things, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that says something about Wayne, says something about his wife, Diane, but it says something about you folks. And it would be remiss of me not to say thank you on behalf of all of the agencies for all of the people that are struggling. If we didn't have personalities, if all we had was news and data, it would never work. We need personalities personalities in media who can tell these stories and help others to tell the stories. So thank you, all of you, for what you've done. It's a huge part of our success or whatever, but I think for all the other agencies and all the other things, we really thank you for all that you've covered and all that you've done.
Well,
thank you so much. That's so sweet,
we appreciate
Glen.
you recognizing that, Glen. Thank you.